We are now, though. We are, in fact, now live.
I don't know if I believe you.
Well, I don't know if I believe me either, but the little thing at the top of my screen tells me I'm live. So
we'll just have to take his word for it.
It's Wednesday. It's another Mattriarchy. And I am, of course, your host, Matt Rhys. Coming to you from cloudy, overcast Scottsbluff, Nebraska. It was a weird, very cool day today up here in the high plains. It started very hot, and then it got muggy, and then it got cool. So I think autumn is around the corner for the first time. We very typically here have an Indian summer. I don't know if you're allowed to say that anymore, but there you have it.
Only if you're from the nation of India, because they do have summer. They have summer.
Aren't they in that
endless summer?
Aren't they in that zone where it's just rainy season, dry season?
It depends.
I don't know anything.
Northern India does connect to the southern end of the Himalayas.
Yeah. Because like my aunt used to live in outside of Brasilia and outside of Sao Paulo, both in Brazil, right? And they got winter, right? But it got cold, but it wasn't like winter in North America, right? So it was still winter. But they didn't call it winter because it wasn't,
it really depends where you are because it is a subcontinent, it is huge. I mean, just like Brazil is huge. But it also has a lot of varying altitude. So if you're in the higher altitude areas, you do get actual winter there.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. So anyway, there you have it. People, somebody already dropped off. They're like, oh God, they're in the weather talk. I'm out of here. So tonight,
welcome to BBC as we discuss the weather in India.
All the old men getting together to talk the weather.
Later on, we will discuss CRT.
Yeah, that wasn't even...
Which kind? Find out.
On today's month of Dmitry Shostakovich's birthday.
Yeah. I don't even know who that is.
He's a composer. They had like a whole month devoted to him one time. That's the only reason I know.
Are you a big NPR fan?
There was a time I would listen to it at night. They had this really great show called Echoes, and they played this like really like indie electronica music. Huh. It was really great. They played it late at night, and so like when I was driving late at night on the road, I would just put on NPR and listen to this like really weird synthy, experimental electronic music.
Well, sucking on a Pikachu and just tripping the hell out.
While driving, yes.
I remember Family Guy had a gag where I think like Brian's watching NPR and you hear the narrator on the TV is like, "We now return to Ken Burns' 10-part documentary on road signs. Tonight, yield." And then you just hear like this old person talking like, "Before they had the sign, people just run into each other."
Wow. That sounds exciting.
So that's not nearly monotone enough for NPR. NPR would be like, well, in 1965, I remember my grandfather, and he went across the road, and he didn't yield, and he died, and we're very
any excitement whatsoever in your
voice.
We
were very, very sad about it.
You guys watch Parks and Recreation?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard about it.
I love Parks and Rec.
So I'm a big Parks and Rec fan. I've seen the whole series probably 4 or 5 times all the way through. Because that's the thing I do. I like to watch the entirety of a series and then go back to it years later. I can't binge it all in one sitting, but you spend like 2 months, that's what your free time is, right? Anyway, Parks and Rec had a side character, and Dan Castaneda, who's the voice of Homer Simpson. He had a recurring character where he was a local public radio DJ in their little town, and he get on that soft voice and talk about the stupidest things you've ever imagined. And now here's an experimental song of a woman standing on one leg crying, coming to you from Pawnee Public Radio. And it was spot on. It was amazing. So anyway, we did not come here to talk about public radio.
Even though that would be a very interesting topic.
Well, I don't know. Because I can get myself off on a tangent. I want to start with a notice. So tonight was supposed to be our rescheduled night to talk with Captain Cummings and Doug Ernst about Stan Lee. But unfortunately, Trump called down the hurricane and is ruining Texas. And so Cap, who is in the National Guard, had to go save people's lives from the hurricane. So thank you, Hurricane Ida. We have to wait for next month to have our Stan Lee conversation.
Thanks.
Yes, thanks.
We had to call backup people like Mark.
So instead, you get somebody else from Texas.
Well,
you're like, hey, Mark answers on the first ring. Let's go for him.
Actually, I didn't know how that was going to work out. Unfortunately, I had to settle for Twitless newegg.com. Newegg. I don't even know who this is, but they're right. I settle for Twitless every week. So
it's like a good marriage. You settle.
Yeah. So the first time we had to reschedule, Mark was actually on backup because Doug Ernst had couldn't make it. He picked up the con crowd. I hope he doesn't mind me saying so, because it's too late now. The world knows. All 30 people that watch my show now know. But then I had some personal life stuff happen, and I had to cancel that week's show, and so we're back, but not with that topic. So Mark, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it's always happy to be here.
Yeah.
It's always a fun topic.
And Metal, you haven't been here for quite a while.
It actually was weird. I was going through my memories today, and obviously it would have fallen on a different day of the week last year. But last year I was on the Ideal Comics Jam on September 1st with you.
Oh, yeah. That was
because it showed up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which is cool. So also, for those of you who don't know, I'll explain that comment. Ideal Comics is the company that I'm part of, a co-founder on, and we try to make comics. And every once and again, we try to get together with the teams, different teams working on projects, and just have like an open staff meeting. We talk ideas, work on projects, and we'll invite people along when we do it.
Yeah, and then it gets really boring, so I have to come in and save them.
Yeah, that does happen. That happened that day for sure. Oh, I'm here for the public radio. Zippy the Unicorn says, I'm here for the public radio discussion.
Wah, wah.
I'm sorry. It was all a bait and switch, Zippy. So that was a mean trick we're having. No, tonight's backup theme was, are you still buying comics?
This will be a very short segment.
Well,
very briefly.
That actually was I won't tell that story.
Show of hands.
But yeah, so I mean, guys, are you still buying comics?
This is going to be a short stream because the answer is no.
It's like
economy.
Well, that's not true. I am buying comics. I'm just not buying new comics. So, put a qualifier on that.
See, I'm with you there too. There are a few new things that I pick up. Some of them are back here. But a lot of my comics are I raid the quarter bins, right? Yeah. I figure, actually, my comic shop has a 50-cent bin, so I'll go in there and I'll be just like, well, here's something weird from Vertigo from the 90s. Here's something weird from whatever, and I will. I'll just say it's 50 cents for a book. So I'll drop a couple bucks on books and have reading material for the week, and or longer.
Hey, you want to flip something really cheap and make a lot of money with zero efforts? This is not a pyramid scheme, I promise you. Go to your 50-cent bin and get all the old Mirage Ninja Turtle comics you can find that are all 50 cents. Doesn't matter what condition they are. Doesn't matter if they're from the era where every issue had a 50,000 copy print run, like the number 25s through like number 45s. Just buy them all up and then sell them each for $20 on eBay, and someone will buy them from you because there is a speculator boom on Mirage Ninja Turtle comics right now, and it's insane.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a lot of love. A lot of love for the certain kinds of older comics, and those, I think, Ninja Turtles especially, have a place for people. So I think that's a big factor there. How about you, Metal? Are you still buying comics?
Yes, in the broad sense. I haven't bought anything from I think a major, at least American publisher since, let's see, when did the Invader Zim comics stop running? 2018, maybe? I don't know. Oni Press. I haven't bought anything from the big five even or Big Two, even more specifically, further back than that. Buy a lot of indie comics from time to time, and manga occasionally, but there's not really one that I'm like on at the moment. I'm waiting for something new to pick up.
So, Twitless, what about you? Are you still buying comics?
So this is kind of a trick question for me because on the one hand, I buy a lot of comics in terms of the fact that I am buying my self-created comic. So and I'm putting tons of money into that. When it comes to purchasing other stuff, I don't do nearly as much. But I will say this: have you guys ever heard of a store called Ollie's?
Yeah.
Good stuff, cheap.
We don't have them here, but I've heard of them.
So it's a store where they get like discounts on like just like I think bulk stuff and lots and things, and so they'll get like mainstream. And they sell everything. You can get can openers and rugs and just anything. What's really neat though is the fact that for some reason they get a whole bunch of like books and especially graphic novels. And you can tell it's the stuff that doesn't sell in the mainstream because it'll be like a gajillion copies of like Squirrel Girl or whatever the heck. But in the mix of there's a bunch of other just like interesting stuff. And so you can get trade paperbacks for like 80 to almost 90% off of like retail. So I will go into an Ollie's and I've bought like a whole slew of like Justice Society back when like is it Jeff Johns? Was he doing Justice Society at one point? Yeah. So Jeff Johns was writing it, and you can get these like trade paperbacks that should be listed for like $18, $20. You get them for like $3, and they're new. So I will just go on spending sprees where I just go and just buy a whole bunch of just random, just anything that looks interesting to me because it's like 80% off. Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of fun. Even if I even get some contemporary stuff in the mix there. I'm not as interested in going and getting a pull list now, although I might try Valiant again at some point because I kind of like Valiant.
Yeah. And I personally, and I do have a couple things in my pull list. I'm getting the Super Sons Maxi series right now, and I just started picking up Exciting Comics, the anthology book that Antarctic puts out. And I really, really enjoy that. That kind of stuff, but most of the new stuff I get is stuff I'm getting directly, right? I mean, Mark, I buy your books.
Yeah, and when I say I don't buy new comics, I was thinking in terms of like the big two. Now I do buy like anytime Doug Tennepool puts out an Earthworm Jim, I pick that one up. I got Forsaken Gods from Fresher Luke. There are some indie books that I pick up, but when we're talking just mainstream books, I pick up like old trade paperback collections of stuff from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like the Marvel Epic collections. And DC's been putting out these two collections of their Batman books going from post-crisis up through, I guess, Nightfall is probably where they're going to cut it off. But I've been picking those up because that stuff's never been collected before. But if it's like anything made after like 2000, I'm just not touching it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a lot of the same way too. Especially now, I'm one of these weird people. I know Twitless and I have talked about it. I think there's been a lot of bemoaning about the quality of comics in the last 10 years.
Just a little.
Yeah, but I honestly think the decay, like in terms of Western comics, actually had its genesis all the way back to 1987, and a massive misreading of Watchmen. But I think that the death really set in Marvel with Civil War, which is an absolute garbage, just trash level book.
And Kingdom Come too.
Well, I hadn't gotten to that one yet. Yes.
The cancer, honestly, and I'm not going to blame Watchmen because Watchmen just as itself is a perfectly good book.
Yeah.
It's just that, like you said, it was a misreading of the market. It was that people enjoyed that in a lot of the Vertigo titles. But the misunderstanding was that the publishers thought that what audiences wanted was nonstop deconstructionism of superheroes. And a deconstruction of a superhero story is not a sincere superhero story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a breakdown and a critique And boy, isn't it stupid that they wear capes? Boy, isn't it stupid that he drives the Batmobile around a majorly congested city? Like stuff like that, where it's not as clever as I think it is. It was fine when Watchmen did it and some of the other ones, but when the mainstream books, you know, the Marvel 616 books and the main DC Universe books are all deconstructionists in and of themselves, you no longer get sincere superhero stories. And then you basically don't get superhero stories, period. You just get parodies and deconstructionisms.
And this is something that Matt Kratz and I have talked about. I think you and I talked about this too, Twitless. But the funny thing about that is like comics, when I was first coming on, like superheroes were my bag, right? But there was Conan, there was Warlord, there was, you know, all this, you know, the sword and sorcery stuff. There was, you know, just books for different people, right? Tintin, yeah. But what they did with the American market is that they narrowed everything down to superhero comics and folded all of the genres into superhero comics. So they were only selling one kind of product. And then they're like, okay, now that you're all reading superhero comics and you all have this taste for this capes and tights material, let's just give you, you know, crappy capes and tights material.
So some of it is just a broader cultural movement with postmodernism, whereas a lot of, you know, those modes, they're traditional storytelling, right? And superheroes are kind of just like fairy tales and folklore and myth, you know. And there's a big difference between a story that is a myth or a folklore story or an action story or a superhero story and a story about that sort of thing, where the topic is superheroes, myth, folklore, but you're doing something else with it. And that's, you know, what's kind of become mainstream is to do what Mark was saying, which is basically deconstruct and do this postmodern thing. And
that's one of the things is like, I was forced to read All-Star Superman last spring.
I just read that too. We did a whole stream on it.
It was so bad. But the thing about it that is, I think you really nailed it there without meaning to talk about it, but it's a story about Superman stories. It's not a Superman story.
Correct.
Right? This is how, you know, Grant Morrison emotionally relates to Superman. It's not a Superman story.
I definitely have
almost a meta story.
It's very much a meta story. Yeah. And as a meta story, there are things I can appreciate, but I've mixed feelings towards it. And yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was just saying, like, I mean, there's a time and a place for meta stories, and there's some that I like very much. Kurt Busiek's Marvels is I still love that miniseries, but it was removed from the 616 continuity. It was very much its own experimental thing. Like, what if Marvel existed in real time and seen through the eyes of a bystander who happens to be a photographer? And you get this great story of the Silver Age Marvel history done in real time, exactly what the experiment was.
Well, and the Golden Age history too. It goes back into that. But the thing about Marvels, right, is that Marvels was utterly sincere with its acceptance of the conceits of the superhero universe, right? And this is one of the big reasons why I think that excuse me, one of the really big things that I think that Civil War is crap, right? Is because Civil War.
And that I'll agree with. Rhys and I disagree on some of these takes, but we're pretty united on Civil War sucked.
Yeah. But part of the reason it sucks is that, like, the 616 and every superhero universe is dependent upon the assumption that it is the right of the exceptional individual to maintain power to enact justice unilaterally, right? The willing acceptance of vigilantism is a required assumption of a superhero universe. The minute you don't have that, you undermine the nature of a superhero universe, right? Now, I think there are stories you can tell within the confines of where you pull that out, right? Like the Incredibles is, I think, a good example, right? Where they assumed it, and then there was the big backlash, and then, you know, whatever else. I think you could tell decent stories with it. But you know, the world of the Incredibles isn't the Marvel universe, right? And to take that assumption away from the Marvel universe just kills it. It just kills the whole thing.
Well, I mean, going back to like the Incredibles, I mean, one of the underlying themes of that first movie was that superheroes were great when everyone took them sincerely. In the prologue, it was Mr. Incredible versus Bomb Voyage, this goofy villain, and it all is ruined the instant somebody introduces real world consequences into that narrative with the suicidal guy suing all superheroes because he wanted to die, and all of a sudden this happy, colorful superhero world is destroyed as soon as this deconstructionist commentary is introduced into it. And then what happens is Mr. Incredible has to get a day job. Everything is bleak and colorless and drab and miserable. There's no more, I don't want to say whimsy, but there's no more humor or adventure in the world until superheroes come back, because that's what the world needs. And that's how The Incredibles ends. It tells you it's I'm not going to say that maybe is what he was trying to say, the direct Brad Bird was trying to say with the movie, but that's very much the impression and the lesson I got from it, is that once you do this Watchmen style, no capes, deconstructionism of superheroes, you introduce that, you destroy them, and everything sucks until you tell sincere superhero stories again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that one of the big problems that it has with that, and I think Watchmen even knows about it. I reread that this year as well, and I really feel that Alan Moore understood more than I think a lot of people had it with it, because he addresses the whole thing of it, but it still talks about that the ideals of the people involved were not rooted in reality, right? It's something aside from or beside a reality. And that was the play on it, is that the stories don't have to, like a great example of a superhero like element, right? Post-crisis, Wally West isn't as fast as Barry, and his body doesn't work the same, and his powers are different. And he burns through calories trying to perform at Flash level stuff, right? And so he's constantly eating ridiculous amounts of sugary food because he needs that fast energy to be the Flash. And so what does he do for money to afford all of this food he has to buy? Well, he ends up being the spokesperson for like chocolate Blasto bites or whatever. I can't remember the thing it is. And so that's kind of a real world thing, but it's also so far removed because you can't just walk in and be the spokesperson, even if you're a world renowned superhero. There's
also no amount of calories that he could eat to maintain that energy anyway. He would go through the entire food supply of the nation.
This is true. Well, let's not talk about all the holes in the dam that Mark Waid fixed. Okay, we'll just leave that aside. But it's a fantasy store. I mean, that's the fantastic. It's those things that feel real, especially when you're reading them when you're like 14. Like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Right. It's a good enough sort of logic. It's like, right. How does Batman get around Gotham City? Oh, he uses the Batmobile. But then when you ask like follow-up questions like, but wouldn't a major metropolitan city have too much traffic for the Batmobile to be feasible? Like, yes, if you have to be pedantic and anal about it, but if you can just take it as good enough that he uses the car to get around the city.
Actually, he just drives on rooftops, as seen in the Christopher Nolan film.
Right. That gave me cancer.
First of all, I thought that was okay for a segment. We wouldn't want that to be usual. That's the difference. As a segment.
There were never good enough answers for me. I kind of liked Magic when everything was kind of just like left in the fantasy and they weren't trying to explain it, because when you just leave it in the realm of magic, it's like, okay, that's outside of physics. It doesn't need to be explained. That's great. When you try to give like these pseudo-realistic explanations for things, everything, like my immersion just gets taken out of the comics, even as a kid.
Yeah, I remember I bought one of those DK Superman Ultimate guides, a long time ago. And I remember they had all those sort of asinine explanations for things of how Superman's powers worked. Like one was like, how does Superman lift up a car by the bumper without the car falling apart, And like, oh, well, Superman emits a force field through his fingers that holds the car together and keeps it from falling apart when he lifts it up by the bumper. And it's like, or it's just a comic and it's fine. And no one ever really asked these questions until 10 years ago when it became fashionable.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be answered in the mystery science
Stanley,
remind yourself it's just a comic.
Right. Yeah. I should really just relax.
Yep.
Exactly.
Stanley had a great piece of advice regarding this, and I liked his approach, which was either you need to know exactly what you're talking about, so that you're representing it, on par with reality, or he said, do what I did, which is I just made it really, really vague, and so it's like radiation did it, and that's like all of his origin stories for like his superheroes early on, cosmic radiation and stuff. Yep. And he said he deliberately kept it super vague because he's like, I'm not a nuclear scientist and I'm not going to spend all the time, because there are some writers who really go down the rabbit hole and they're like, I have to research every single like scientific aspect of nuclear physics in order to make a Dr. Manhattan character. And it's like, no. Stanley pretty much proved that you just need to be a good storyteller and get people invested in the emotional side of things.
Well, it's really cool too. If you leave it vague, you can end up making like your own mechanical structure within the universe. Because like cosmic radiation is kind of like evolved into its own mystical force that is not like normal radiation in the world. And like you have the freedom to work in that type of fantastic space when you do stuff like that.
Yeah. Before he died, I was at Dallas Comic Expo 2014, I think. I went to a panel with Stan Lee, and he said like one of the questions he always gets throughout his whole career is like, who would win in a fight, such and such versus so and so? And his answer is always like, whoever the writer wants to win, because the writer can make up any reason they want for such and such to beat so and so, or vice versa. Like how does the Human Torch beat Galactus? Oh, he gets the ultimate nullifier. There you go. The Human Torch just beat Galactus. It's just like you come up with a plot device to do it. So, I mean, these conversations are fun to have, just when you're shooting the shit with your friends. But it all comes down to whoever the writer wants to win.
Have you ever been on a comicvine.com when they have the battle forums?
Oh, the battle royales? I mean, I've seen Death Battle on YouTube, things like that. But no, I've never seen Comicvine.
Yeah, Comicvine is a website. It's kind of like user-generated, and it's kind of like a wiki of sorts where people put a lot of comic book information in it. One of the things that I think they're kind of known for a little is the fact that they have this whole battle forum, and people will create, I would almost say, doctoral or at least master's thesis level defenses for. They'll set up a fight between two characters, Deadpool versus Wolverine. And then you pull out your evidence, you pull out your issues, you pull out your panels, and you list your feats, and this is why this character will win. And those threads go on forever.
Oh,
but
they're really fun.
But they're a lot of fun because the people who are like really into the comics, they pull out like all the lore.
Yeah, they actually put Death Battle to shame. I've always complained about those videos. I even know the guys who make them. Like personally, I've met them several times and hung out with them, and it's like, guys, there are people on the internet that have day jobs that aren't dedicating all their time to this, that just put you to shame when it comes to researching this shit.
I may have contributed to one or two of those once. There was this really big one that went on for like hundreds of pages, and it was I think it was Shuma Gorath versus. Who is the Sidorak?
Okay.
Oh, I know the second one, but I don't know the first one.
Shuma Gorath is I know him from the Marvel versus Capcom video games. He's the giant octopus.
He's in the comics. He's a Doctor Strange enemy.
Yeah, he's basically Cthulhu.
Oh, okay.
Hehe's an eldritch. He's
eyeball with the tentacles.
Yeah. He's in it because the Japanese needed a tentacle monster. This very obscure battle between Shuma Gorath and Sidorak. I mean, it was like it reached the level of a theology debate because some people started pulling out like from the Marvel handbooks, like the cosmology where it actually shows the overlapping planes of like existence.
Yeah, it's like whose level is higher, so who would have dominance between their domains and stuff like that.
Yeah, it got intense.
This is so much easier in Dragon Ball Z where they just have power levels and it's like, oh, numerically this one's stronger, so he wins.
That's not as much fun.
Oh, I was gonna say that thread is a lot of fun to read because it's like it's between two characters that people don't care as much about, but the amount of care people put into the defense is like absurd.
Like these guys could be lawyers.
That's right? Yeah, instead of doing
maybe this is just what they do in their free time when they're bored.
So that's a side. But I want to actually come back to that thought in a second. Dominic Powell in the chat has brought a couple of cool things up about Moore that I wanted to go ahead and mention. I had this up on the stream earlier, but I pulled it off because we couldn't see all of the Metal's face for a while. We're on a different track. Creatives took the wrong lesson from Alan Moore and Watchmen. Moore is a cynical optimist, yet shows a genuine love for superheroes. A look at Top 10, Supreme, and others, they are reconstructions. I would also like to point out that Watchmen itself reconstructs the archetypes throughout the third act, even while the plot's going on. That's a sort of a subtle thing that's happening in conversations, and that's something I think that doesn't get picked up at. And then he also said, it was quite a ways down there. We got a very talking chat. No, that wasn't it. It was this one. If you're deconstructing a trope or an archetype to analyze it at its basic element, then you reconstruct it, thus resembling how they were originally refined and modified to show why they're relevant. And that is something I think is important too, that a lot of modern comics have missed. And I think a really good example of that aspect is if you look at Nightfall. Now, not everyone is a big fan of Nightfall, but if you look at the Nightfall trilogy, right, the trilogy of stories, and then I think you really kind of see Bruce Wayne, the rebuilding of Bruce Wayne as to why he is Batman. Why does that matter? And that's something that, and it also did a lot. I think it answered 20 years worth of questions of, well, why doesn't Batman just kill people? That had to go a lot with the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's because then he couldn't be friends with the Gotham PD and Commissioner Gordon, and then if he's not friends with Gotham PD and Commissioner Gordon, then he really can't operate as Batman, because then they're actually going after him, and he doesn't have that support, and then he's not a hero if he's not on the side of the police. So it all falls apart if Batman just starts, killing the Joker and murdering all the thugs left and right.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's the practical aspect of it, but even from a story perspective, right? What drives Batman isn't vengeance. What drives Batman is because vengeance is directed at the person responsible, right? Batman is looking at a larger systemic issue, right? So I think what you're looking at with Batman is that Batman's real driving force is a desire for mercy for other people. I suffered. I don't want you to suffer. I was broken and hurt. I don't want you to be broken and hurt. And that's something that's a very different take on it. And so if he goes around killing people, then he can't be a dark angel of mercy, so to speak.
Yeah, he's just looking to live in a just world. Mm-hmm. However he has to come across that. Right. And killing just won't bring him to a just world. And
the other thing too is Batman's not. I mean, in the no comics I've read, and I haven't read recently, but Batman's not anti capital punishment. He leaves that to the justice system to figure out. Mm-hmm. So really the problem is, why is the Gotham DA so bad at killing the Joker? Because it's not Batman's job to kill the Joker. It's
because it's the insanity, please.
Yeah, I think even
having New Jersey.
Yeah, it's like I think even having this conversation, it's that there's the trend of people just wanting to go darker and darker and darker with Batman over the decades, ever since Dark Knight Returns in Year One and Frank Miller. And again, this is a misreading of the character, where they just took it. Eventually, over time, they take it too far. When Batman is always supposed to have a sense of humor and mercy about him. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of people anyway, not everybody, but a lot of people consider the Batman, the animated series version, to be the most balanced, well-represented version of Batman, because he still believes that Harvey Dent can be cured of being Two-Face. There's still that great episode where he finds out that Two-Face kidnapped himself on the eve when he's supposed to have plastic surgery. And at the end, he goes back to being Bruce Wayne so he can greet Harvey Dent at Arkham Asylum and wish him the best and mean it, because that's who Batman is. He still has hope. He's not so defeated and cynical and miserable that he just wants to take every crazy person and lock them away in a dungeon and never let them see the light of day. He still believes that there's an episode with Harley where she gets she gets a clean bill of health, and he still believes that she can be good again, because that's a hopeful Batman. He's still dark and he's still edgy, but he's not completely defeated by the world.
Well, and I'd like to point out that, Steve, what was his last name? Englehart,
Yeah,
was writing Batman in the 70s. Denny O'Neil did some Batman stories. Archie Goodwin was editing back then. From 75 up until Denny retired, right? That was Bruce Wayne's character in the comic, right? And that's the Batman Chuck Dixon wrote. That's the Batman Alan Grant wrote, right? And yeah, I mean, you did have some of the edgier stuff that Frank Miller did, but even year one was to set up how a person can be so driven and yet learn compassion. And he learns year one shows Bruce Wayne learning compassion through his interaction with Jim Gordon, you know, and that's something.
And that's even within the narrative of the comic. You know, I've said I was reading these collections of the '90s Batman run that DC's finally putting out that they'd never collected before. And when they introduced Tim Drake after Jason Todd died, and they introduced Tim Drake, it's a long haul for Tim Drake to become Robin. He doesn't even want to be Robin at first. The whole reason he shows up and tells Bruce Wayne that he's figured out that he's Batman, he's like, "Hey, Bruce, like you've been acting really dark since Jason died. Could you dial it back a notch?" He's like, "I think you need a Robin or just somebody hanging around to take the edge off for you, man."
Yeah, A Lonely Place of Dying is such an epic story, and that was actually like I got into Batman like I got into superhero comics and monthly, you know, newsstand comics just as Tim Drake got the Robin suit, right? One of my first comics I ever bought was Robin issue 2 by Dixon and Lyle, and so like I started reading it, started reading the letter columns, and I like one of the first things I bought at a comic shop was the original trade release of A Lonely Place of Dying, and I've read that, geez, I don't know, 8 times, right? Through that. And that was one of the things that like it was, you know, and Bruce having someone to care for, knowing that he had responsibilities, was the perfect foil to give you that kind of the Batman that smiles when no one's looking kind of character. That was such a great thing to read.
And Denny really did keep it in check, because it was after Denny left and in the 90s that just a few, like 5 or 6 years later, we got Infinite Crisis era Batman, where that was when he went super paranoid and he created Brother Eye, and he has like all of his Justice League contingency files, and he's just a maniac who hates and distrusts everybody. And he fires Robin because Robin's dad is worried about him, like just absolute asshole Batman. Right,
and that's one of the things. Like if you look, that's one thing my dislike for Kingdom Come aside. Right. It was in that period between Kingdom Come and Denny's retirement that a lot of the universe stuff was shifting. But with the release of because I really think that Kingdom Come was like the first like death gurgles, and the final nail in the coffin of the post-crisis DC universe was Identity Crisis. And Brad, this is nothing against Brad Meltzer. I've read several of his novels. They're excellent. He's a great thriller writer. But whoever gave the okay to kill Jack Drake should be wrapped on the knuckles at the bare minimum, because that was that right there ruined that, and that story just ruined the DC universe. It could every event after that was this long spiral to the inevitability of the New 52, because it needed something, because it had just ruined everything.
Rhys, we need to do a whole episode on Kingdom Come, because it's we in chat we've got some disagreement. Zippy says Kingdom Come is good.
Now, here's the thing too. Like, not the last time, maybe the time before the last time I was on this program, you two were on here talking about how you needed to have a chat about Kingdom Come, and you guys still haven't had it.
No, we kind of did. You kind of did. Twitless had gone back and reread it again, and I hadn't read it, and he brought up some very interesting metatextual concepts about it, and I was like, I want to reread it based on those, because that is an interesting perspective on there. But I really think my problem with Kingdom Come is, as a longtime comic fan, right, as a person who cut his comic book teeth on the post-crisis DC universe, the Kingdom Come was not a separate continuity. It was written in the post-crisis continuity as a potential alternate future where all of the heroes we read about monthly failed. Like everybody has to suck for 20 years in order for Kingdom Come to happen.
So it was like the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but for
It was the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Yes.
Have you read it, Mark?
Oh, Kingdom Come. Yeah, I've read it a couple times, and it's been a long time since I read it. And maybe I should give it a reread because I probably just wasn't picking up on a lot of that stuff. I remember enjoying it the first time, and then the second time it didn't hold up quite as well. You know, once the Alex Ross art kind of like, you know, it ceases to be like amaze you with every page, you know, because you've already read it before. You know, you read the story, and like if I read the story at like face value with no metatextual subtext or commentary, then it's fine. But I gotta give it another look. But I know we're deviating, I guess, from the topic of do you still buy comics, but I think this is still related because these are all the reasons why we kind of stopped buying comics, or at least as much of them, of the mainstream books anyway. Well,
and I mean, part of it for me is like I got pretty a few years ago. I quit buying comics because they just were kind of expensive, and I needed to do something different with my life, right? And I have 5 file cabinets that are full of comic books, and some of them I've read and some of them I haven't. And so it's not like I'm at a shortage of reading material. So I could never buy another comic and then still have stuff that I need to read in the next 10 years. Although, you know, maybe that's an overestimate. It might be 5 if I really sat down and did it. But anyway, point being, but for me, part of the thing is I love like I love the complexity and the world building of old comics, and I just don't feel like modern comics have stakes in the kind of myth that I appreciate from those older books. So that's kind of my take on a big part of that. So it's not for me. I had noped out for a little while, and also New 52. Like as much as the universe had gone totally astray by then, I just really hated the New 52 books. I just couldn't stand much.
That was when I finally tapped out of DC. I got into Scott Snyder's Batman, and I got into who was writing Swamp Thing and Animal Man? Was that also Scott Snyder? Anyway, no, who was that?
Didn't Alan Moore do? Or sorry, Alan Moore. Grant Morrison, I thought, did Animal.
Yeah. No, the New 52 Animal Man and Swamp Thing.
Okay.
Well, whoever. I mean, I was reading those, and I don't know. They weren't grabbing me. I read, Court of Owls, which is considered like Scott Snyder's best thing. Like, yeah, but I just read, Grant Morrison's Batman about the Black Hand, which or whatever the. Dr. Hertz, which it was like the exact same story about a secret society that had a member of Bruce Wayne's family that had been manipulating him his whole life. Like, oh, we're doing this again already with Court of Owls. It's the same story, and even that was Bernie Wrightson's The Cult from the 80s. Already did that story.
Well, and here's the thing. Here's part of the thing about the Court of Owls that just gets I could never even sign in, and I've had tons of people that are like, no, it's an amazing story. You got to check it out, and I'm like, I could check it out if it was a Legends of the Dark Knight, if this was a story that was happening during year 1, year 2, maybe even year 3. But Batman is supposed to be the world's greatest detective. And you're telling me that there's a super secret enclave of powerful people running everything and he hasn't noticed it for 20 years? I'm out.
So
that will never engage me.
I prefer, at the very least, I do prefer Court of Owls to Batman R.A.P. Because I felt like, because wasn't R.A.P. the Black Hand, wasn't that Morrison as well?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't like Morrison's Batman run anyway.
Yeah, I did not. Yeah, I did not like that. And Court of Owls was I was kind of lukewarm on it. But at least thematically, it's got stronger visuals and, with the whole owl symbolism than whatever the heck was going on with Black Hand.
It was more coherent, at least. But, and then I stuck with it up through the start of 0 year. And it's like, all right, we're just doing Batman's origin over again. I'm done. I've got Batman year 1 if I ever want to read Batman's origin again. Thanks. I'm tapping out. And thanks for Dominic for saying Jeff Lemire. That was the name that was on the tip of my tongue.
Well, and that would be one thing too, is like if they were really doing the New 52 where they were actually starting over and not keeping the old continuity, right? But that was part of the thing that bugged me is that like not a big secret, I'm a huge Aquaman fan, right? And I think Aquaman is one of the most underappreciated comic characters in comics. And Jeff Johns Aquaman is not bad, right? But everything he wrote about had already been handled as well or better by Peter David and oh my goodness, I forgot his name.
Who wrote him in the 70s?
Even in the 90s, I'm talking about, like, with Modern Sensibilities. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the 70s is really good too, as far as like the like classic detective stories and political intrigue stuff. And Steve Epting did some of those. I can't remember all that folks, but I mean, his story was complex and it was interesting, and the characters were realistic, and I really Dan Jurgens did there we go. Had the third big arc in the 90s, and his stuff, he was only on it for a short period of time, but it was excellent.
Well, the mistake I think they made with New 52, like you mentioned, was that they wanted to reboot the continuity, but they didn't want to interrupt their best-selling comics, the storylines of Green Lantern and Batman. So they did like, everything's a reboot, but these story arcs currently ongoing in Green Lantern and Batman are still canon. So we have to start everything like 6 years after the origins. And they did the exact same thing after Crisis on Infinite Earths. They didn't want to interrupt New Teen Titans and some of the other comics that were still selling really well. So we ended up with these really bad like continuity errors, like Wonder Girl existing before Wonder Woman because they had New Teen Titans still going, stuff like that. It's like they didn't learn their lesson. Well, I mean,
part of that had to do with there was a whole bunch of stuff with that, but I really think that especially a lot of the continuity conscious writers in the 90s had patched enough of those holes that it didn't even, I don't think it really hurt at all, with the exception of Donna Troy. Donna Troy is the one character in the entire DC universe that was never really explained well. Maybe Power Girl, that can be argued, but Donna Troy was a mess.
So is Danny Chase.
Yeah, Hawkman and all of his weird bull crap. Yeah,
Hawkman, the Jeff Johns.
I know he fixed that one, but it took a while. It did take a really long time.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, okay, so I won't get into all that. That's a whole different thing. But yeah, I'm not. And continuity is complicated anyway. But that's the whole thing. So, we've talked about who's still buying comics. I'm like I said, I'm a huge back issue guy. But when I started getting back into buying comics recently. I mean, a couple years ago, and trying to find some stuff that felt good, right? And I thought Jeff Johns helming the Rebirth, I thought did a pretty good job of a lot of that stuff, but they never really, they didn't really land it, right? And this actually, comes to an interesting little point too. Like it's a side note, but people talk about the reason that modern comics aren't doing well enough is because the stories aren't good. But I don't necessarily think that's entirely the case, because there are people that are doing really good stories that still aren't selling the numbers that they need, right? Like The Silencer. I don't know if any of you guys read Danny Abnett's The Silencer, but it was an awesome little crime comic, right? About a metahuman assassin who had retired, and then the past comes to call, right? And I just thought that, and they did a really good job with it. And the character dynamics were really cool. I just really liked it, but nobody read it, and it didn't get any press at all, and that was it.
So one thing I think is interesting is because I'm a newer whippersnapper. I don't have. My feelings are more generous to some of the things like New 52 and stuff. I have some of the stuff I picked up at Ollie's, and I was like, some of this is fun. And there was some Superman art, I think is it All Star Comics? That's just absolutely phenomenal. I have to look it up again who the artist was, but there was some fantastic art I really enjoyed. But I think the thing that really started really kind of souring me, there were just a few disillusioning moments, and I could even narrow it down to a couple panels, and a lot of them came from Marvel Comics, but there's been a few DC ones as well. And I think that for some of us, I'm not saying you guys here, but I think for some people, there's a game over panel, and it's the panel where the panel tells you, screams at you and says, we hate you. you comic book nerd. Yeah. And comic books are no longer for you. In fact, we really think you're disgusting and you should go away. And for me, that panel, I'm obsessed with Ollie's good stuff, cheap. So the panel for me is this one from like, it was your boy Zach pulled it up, and it was Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, and it was this the new version of her, which was all ugly and terrible looking, and she's looking at like a film actress who's portraying her, who looks like the way she's always been portrayed in comics. And you literally had this sort of meta moment where new Ms. Marvel is looking at about too. Yeah. New Ms. Marvel is looking at old Ms. Marvel. I'll just see if I can pull it up. And she's literally just like got this hold up. She's literally like it was just this panel of utter hatred. Sorry. This was from earlier. I just wanted to let you know that whole like that crazy thread with Sidorak is I wasn't just making that up, and there totally was a cosmology list.
This is like a daily thing over on Comic Vine.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested, check out the Comic Vine's battle threads. They're nuts.
And if you're a creator, you should also see if you have a page on Comic Vine. Literally, all you need to do, if you're an independent publisher, is have your thing on Comixology, and somebody will probably add you. I have pages about myself on Comic Vine.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, I just found I was Googling my stuff. It's like, oh, hey, look, here I am.
But to bring it back to the main point, I think for some of us, there's these panels where the comic is basically screaming, "I hate you," and it's like, okay, well, sorry, and then like I'm kind of done. And for me, there's a few panels that are like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the biggest problem with you have something like that is the baby in bathwater scenario, right? Like if you've got, and this is part of the reason why I go back to back issues, or I look for, Mark's books are good examples of this kind of thing, where you have there are creators who are still making what you're trying to sell, what you want to buy rather. Robert Venditti, the stuff that he's written, I have a lot of respect for the stuff he's put out. Same thing with I was talking about Danny Abnett. His Aquaman is like, it was action and royal intrigue. It got the flavor that I really wanted out of Aquaman. I mean, I was a little annoyed that they de-aged him and they'd taken away his traumatic history and his heroic recovery and everything else, and they unmarried him from Mira, which Abnett inherited that from the New 52, but but at the same time, like, he was telling real Aquaman stories. It's not Game of Thrones underwater, Game of Thrones was Aquaman on land. So that's one of the things that I love, that aspect that he hit on it. So I think there are writers that are out there that are telling the stories that you might want to read or have already, because we've got gobs and gobs of back issues that we could go through. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people want to doom and gloom about stuff, when there really are, if you want to spend your money, there are books you can buy that you want. Or
75
if you don't,
years of Superman and Captain America comics that you've probably only ever read 10% of, So if you don't like the current Captain America Superman books, I mean, there is just more than you could read in a lifetime.
Well, and think about like about a year before he was resigned, Dan DiDio got in front of the comics, the comic shop symposium. I can't remember what the name of it was right now. That he complained that they were ordering more of the reprint issues than they were the new books, and why would they hurt the company that way?
I was actually going to bring that up. It's an interesting thing too. It's like, it's sending a message that people would rather read this old material than the stuff they're currently putting out. And I mean, I've noticed, that one.
This broke me.
I mean, so
I was
I've
already
noticed
broken
that,
before that. that hurt bad, because Carol, back before she became Captain Marvel, actually used to be my favorite Marvel character. I kind of liked like the second string down to the D-listers more than like the mainstream for a long time, and I really liked Miss Marvel. Right around it was like 2011 or 12, whenever the whole like X-Men versus Avengers thing was going on.
Oh, I love
where
that
she
series.
took the
Yeah.
mantle of Captain Marvel. It's like they shoved a stick right up her ass and never took it out.
Well,
Right.
she was an interesting
It's like a
character
flip.
because
They just
she,
changed her arc.
right.
altogether.
She had a lot of baggage and she had a lot of character flaws. She was an alcoholic, especially during her Warbird days. She had all
Right.
that backstory. I mean, with Rogue stealing her powers, her becoming binary, that whole thing where she goes to another dimension that marry her son. There's really messed up stuff. And that's probably why she was an alcoholic. In fact, I think that's the canonical reason why she started drinking, hitting the bottle like Tony Stark levels. But that made her interesting. Having bad things happen to her and having her have flaws is what made Carol interesting. But as soon as she became Captain Marvel, they dissolved all of that, and she just became Ms. Perfect, and she became boring.
Well,
It's like a
and
light switch,
some
too,
people
overnight.
Some people I'm sorry, you were gonna Twitless.
She had. I was going to say she had this rich history with the X-Men. Because didn't Claremont use her a bunch? Yeah. So she had all this like rich history with the X-Men, and like it's a shame because like to modern people, she's just like Brie Larson now. Like she's been like pretty effectively ruined.
Well, and here's something I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. We're almost to the top of the hour again here, but I know there's a hot right now, and I don't understand how this is a thing, right? I think it's because of the reactionary nature of people who don't actually think things through. But that's my opinion on it. But there's this knee-jerk reaction people are having about legacies and how like there shouldn't be legacy characters. I think it depends on the character for one, but I think that that's legitimate. And the fact of it is that Marvel did a really brave thing in the 70s by killing Captain Marvel, right? Because he wasn't doing a lot with the story. They needed to do something to make it interesting, and they made him a tragic hero rather than just let him become a B-lister no one cared about, right? And it paid off. People have loved that story for a long time, and so having people come along to try to live up to that legacy of heroic sacrifice, that's cool. Just like when Wally became the Flash after Barry's died. That was cool, which is exactly why, bringing Barry back from the dead was a horrible mistake.
Yeah, the problem, I think, and the reason... So there's room in this vast universe of superhero stories for legacy characters, but also for characters who their identity is that one individual and it begins and ends with them. And I think what broke that and is bringing all this attitude down against legacies is what Marvel has been doing with Spider-Man and turning him into a legacy character. And you can tell it's not being done for sincere reasons. It's being done so like, oh, we want a movie with a black Spider-Man. Okay, well, Spider-Man's a mantle, so now we have Miles Morales. Or we want a movie with a girl Spider-Man. Spider-Man's a mantle. It's a legacy. Anybody can be Spider-Man. There's a Spider-Verse, so now we can make a movie with a girl Spider-Man. Spider-Man's not just Peter Parker. Spider-Man's anybody we want it to be, so we can cast anybody we want in a movie to play Spider-Man, and they'll be Spider-Man. Like, Spider-Man was the antithesis when he was created to a legacy hero. He was a teenager who wasn't a sidekick. He was not, and he was never going to be anybody's sidekick. Spider-Man's not a legacy. He's just Spider-Man. The entire thing with the Clone Saga, be it the 70s or 90s version, was that when these other characters came in and tried to be Spider-Man, at the end of the day, they said, no, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. You go away and dissolve into dust or something. Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
See,
and now,
that reminds me of like Syndrome from The Incredibles. Like when everyone's super, no one is.
Exactly.
And it's like, when everyone's Spider-Man, no one is.
No one is.
I mean, and the irony of that is that Spider-Man is the everyman just by himself, right? But I don't think you reinforce that by diluting his identity. You reinforce that
own
by
identity.
You reinforce that by letting him grow up, right?
Yeah.
Like that was one of the best things about the Spider-Girl series that on can't remember the guy who wrote it back then for the M2, right? The Marvel Future thing.
With Mayday Parker
was that you got to see Pete, old. You got to see him having lived through those experiences and how that shaped him, and after getting hurt, how he reacted to that, and he was still Spider-Man. He just couldn't do the things that Spider-Man does. And as a young man, I'd like, that's pretty insightful. And now as an old man, I relate to that really hard.
Right. Well, it's like when in the 90s when, there is only one Superman. Clark Kent is Superman. And they reinforced that in the 90s with Reign of the Supermen, where they had all these other characters, Cyborg, Eradicator, Superboy, and Steel. They all wanted to be Superman or were mistaken for Superman. But at the end of the story, Clark comes back from the dead and it's like, no, Clark Kent, Kal-El is Superman. It's not a legacy. It's not, a mantle that can be passed down. This isn't Superman International where there's a bunch of different Superman. No, it's just this one character. Now, the Flash, like you said, and the Flash has a rich history that goes back to the Silver Age of being a legacy character. It goes back to the Golden Age. Jay Garrick was the Flash in the Golden Age. Barry Allen was the Flash in the Silver Age. Wally West was his sidekick in the Silver Age. Wally West became the Bronze Age Flash. And then Impulse became his sidekick. And for a little while, Impulse was Flash, but he only had like 13 issues before they went back to Wally. But they tried. Their arch nemesis is a legacy. The Reverse Flash. There's Rival. There's Professor Zoom. There's Inertia. It's like the Flash is a legacy franchise, so that works. But but legacies just can't be exported and put onto every other character. It doesn't work for every other character.
Well, especially if your legacy is a mythological god and the person's birth name.
Right. Yeah, Thor.
It just does not work with Thor.
And and there were moments in time when they pulled it off right with Eric. He became Thunderstrike later.
Thunderstrike, yeah.
And with Beta Ray Bill, right, were things where the nature of the divine sphere in which Thor exists causes him to take on a different role for a time, where he needs to be the king of Asgard or whatever.
Yeah,
I think that makes sense.
But they're not really Thor.
They didn't go by Thor. They got his powers, but they still went by Thunderstrike and Beta Ray Bill. They weren't saying I'm Thor now. Like maybe I'm the god of thunder now, or maybe I have Thor's powers, but I'm not Thor.
Right. And one of those things too, especially when those characters continued on, beyond that. With Thunderstrike, he was the Thor with the mask on for a while. And that was Eric Masterson. Thank you, Dominic Powell.
But okay, I have to agree though with Mark and Metal here a little bit. There's this insidious contemporary desire to not only take powers, but to completely absorb and consume the very identity and name. I remember, I think it was Bendis who was saying things like, Miles Morales is not Miles Morales. He is Spider-Man. It was just like this definitive, like ontological statement. And it was just like, what is your beef deal? Like you can make a spider character, although I think it's kind of like I think it's a derivative, but like, it was like, no. This is Spider-Man. It's like this character, Jane Foster is Thor. And it's like, what is your beef?
Well,
like,
I think my biggest
what's your deal?
My biggest problem with the Jane Foster situation is that, there's two issues. One is the mythologic issue, right? Which is that Thor is the embodiment of the Norse idea of masculinity, right? Like that's what he is. So to say,
which even involves dressing up in drag sometimes.
Only after losing a
when
bet,
you need to,
because you have to honor when you lost your bets.
like a man, like a.
But when you need to make sure that the fair lady of your place doesn't get married off to like a Cyclops or something.
That works too. But yeah. So that's part of the thing is that was the one problem I had with it. The other problem was it involved shaming Thor to elevate Jane, right? It wasn't that like it was when Eric Masterson first took the hammer. It was because, in that setup, there was a mini Ragnarok and Odin wasn't in a place anymore and somebody had to rule Asgard. And so there was no protector for Earth. So Eric Masterson had to step up and become Earth's Thor because Thor was too busy being Odin.
And that's the big thing too, is that they don't know how to build characters without tearing someone else down. And so that's the big grievance I had with Into the Spider-Verse, was that they had to tear Peter Parker down in order to build Miles Morales up. Peter Parker's fat, he's old, Mary Jane's divorcing him, he's crying in the shower, he's a loser. And now look, we got this new guy, Miles Morales, he's the new Spider-Man, he's awesome. He's young, he's the different. It's like they had to destroy Peter just to make Miles look good. So then was Miles very good to begin with if you have to make Peter look like crap? Yeah, that's not how you do it. You can look at the difference, the transition between Barry Allen to Wally West. Barry Allen died a hero. They didn't have to tear Barry down to build Wally up. Barry sacrificed himself, and Wally spends like the first many years of his volume trying to live up to Barry until Return of Barry Allen, which is the Mark Waid story that Professor Zoom came back, and that's when Wally has to get over it, learn that if he wants to beat Professor Zoom, he has to be better than Barry was, which he'd been holding himself back, and he does, and he earns it. But that's building up the character without tearing the other down.
Well, and one of the things, even with like the stuff that like Barron wrote before that, and LaRocca wrote, right? LaRocca, I think Walt Simonson. Right? What?
LaRocca was the artist.
Yeah, Drew. I'm sorry. But Simonson did some of those Wally stories too. They still were able to build on Wally's continued growth. So like Waid, I don't want to take anything away from what Waid did with the Return of Barry Allen, but he got to complete the work that other people had been doing for years.
It finally got to pull the trigger.
Yeah, they finally got to pull the trigger on Wally not being a loser.
Yeah, right.
It's been years of him, and that actually is something that dates back to Wolfman, right? In the pages of New Titans, Wally struggling with, well, what do I do? Because Barry's so amazing, and now here I am, and man, my dad sucks, and my mom sucks, and I just don't even know how to make life.
That's the way it's supposed to be done. The original guy is still great. The new guy has to earn his stripes. And that's the way you build up your new character without tearing down the predecessor, which is the opposite of the way it's being done now. It's like the old guy has to fail, and then the new guy has to come in and say, I'll take care of this. Leave it to me. I'm better than you. And that's the way, like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I know everyone's sick to death of talking about it, but they had to emasculate and destroy every single character from the original trilogy, Leia included, in order to build up this one character of Rey Skywalker. And she goes through no arc whatsoever because she's already, immaculate at the start of that storyline. And that's the exact opposite of how you're supposed to tell a story and build a character.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, I don't think they had to do that. Like, I mean, even with the first movie, you see, Han has a tragic end, but it wouldn't necessarily have to have been a pointless end if they hadn't totally screwed the pooch.
One thing, and I think Mark and Rhys and Metal, I'm sure anyone who does like writing of any type, especially those of us who've done comics, and many of us who've done comics, we started off with fan fiction. That's often how like the arc that you follow. I wrote some terrible Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction back in the day, as a side note. But I think one thing that comes to mind here is the fact that Mark, when you were bringing up the whole idea of tearing down the established character to make room for your character, is that it really smacks of amateur writing. It smacks of amateur, like fan fiction-ish writing, where it's like, I want to introduce my new character, and he's like stronger than Superman, right? And so I have to tear down Superman to make my new character come in. But these are like things you should outgrow when you're like a teenager and you're writing fan fiction on forums and people tell you that you're terrible. Like, you're supposed to outgrow that need to do that garbage. And
Gold Steel the Hedgehog. You're not supposed. That's supposed to be a joke,
Right. Nothing personnel, kid.
but like,
and that actually I want to bring up an example of this, right? With Tim Drake, Robin, right? He was in every way better than Jason Todd. In every way better than Jason Todd. But you know who didn't know it? Tim Drake.
Yeah. Right?
Right? Yeah. So he was specifically written to be a kid who was humble, who knew his faults, who was out of his element, but it was going to do it anyway. But he wasn't out of his element. He was 100% better. But he looked at the sacrifice of Jason Todd and said, that's what I want. If I'm going to be in this position, I want to have that kind of will, And that's one of the things where, like, if they had introduced, and, with the Miles Morales character in the context of the Ultimate Universe, I would necessarily have a problem with it, right? But how does that work into a universe where Pete still exists? And I don't think it is. And I haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse, so I can't comment on that at all. Because Hollywood, they can just go away.
Well, I mean, what they've been doing to Spider-Man is like it's this again tearing him down. Spider-Man, like I said, was invented in the '60s to be the antithesis of what everyone thought a teenage superhero was supposed to be. He wasn't a legacy character. He wasn't a sidekick. He was his own character. If he had a problem, he had to solve it himself. He didn't have a sidekick. He didn't have anybody but himself. And then in the MCU movies, I know everyone's like, oh, you're going to say Iron Boy, aren't you? Like, well, it's true. Every time he's got a problem, he goes to Mr. Stark. Every time he needs a suit, he goes to Mr. Stark. Oh, I need armor to go into space. He goes to Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark, what do I do? Mr. Stark. He's Iron Man's sidekick. And that is the worst reading of Spider-Man I've ever seen in my life. The exact opposite of everything he was ever meant to be. But again, it's this infantilizing and tearing down of the character so that it's more accepting. Like, oh, Spider-Man was just Iron Man's sidekick. It's a legacy. Anybody can be Spider-Man. You know, they're diminishing the character and his importance in order to build up all these other crappy new fake Spider-Men like Ghost Spider and whatever Miles Morales calls himself.
Oh, I don't know. For a while, it was Spider. Spy, like the engine.
No.
Wow, that's weak.
Yeah, it was
fitting.
Well, I don't know. I can't really comment a lot on that one, but yeah, I think that legacy is an important thing. And I think that actually is a thing that can tie, if it's done well, it can tie you into the universe in a way that drives you to buy those old trades and drives you to buy those back issues, right? And could you know, if like Tyler, who was in the chat earlier, is always talking about the Shonen Jump app.
The Shonen Jump app is great.
I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying he never stops talking about the Shonen Jump app, which is fine. But like that's what the thing is like DC could have been making money on their catalog for 15 years, right, in a digital comics format, since web comics have been a thing since the 90s. So we're talking 25 years of time that DC has lost out on income because they didn't want to sell a digital product.
Well, it kind of
accessible thing like that.
We were going on about you know, those reprint editions and how they're outselling new books for a long time. I mean, DC is only just now putting out dedicated chronological volumes of Batman, you know, Detective and the main Batman series, starting from Post-Crisis up through Nightfall. They've never done that before. There are decades of Batman comics that have never been collected ever. That's because they never needed to, because the new Batman comics always sold. So there was these catalogs of stuff they never had to reprint before to make money. These Epic collections by Marvel are collecting all these like chunks of X-Men comics from the 80s that have never been collected before. These runs of Defenders and even Amazing Spider-Man. It's hard to believe that there are chunks of Amazing Spider-Man that have never been reissued in a trade. But they're having to resort to these old comics now because the new ones aren't selling.
Well,
where in the past, Yeah,
one thing about that that's really interesting too is the Marvel Essentials books, the big black and white newsprint jobs they used to have in the from, I don't know if they still do them, but they had them from the 80s all the way up until like the early 2000s, and they would be in reprints for these books, and they kept selling because Marvel comics from the old days were so hard to get a hold of. This is totally a side note, but part of why they were so hard to get a hold of is that the only distributor Marvel could work with back in the 60s was DC. And DC limited their number of books that Marvel could put out, and which was a win-win for DC, by the way. Because however many Marvel sold, those were people that would go to the newsstands to buy Marvel books and then buy a DC book by default if it was the ones that were left. But that's why the Marvel had 2-in-1s for, you know, so many categories. Why Tales of Suspense was Iron Man and Thor. Why, you know, that whole thing was like that, because they could double the number of kind of stories and the kind of market that they could get each, because they were limited. They weren't allowed to have with their contract with DC. But there was a demand for all that kind of stuff. And so it seems crazy to me that, I mean, I know Marvel tried an online distribution for their books in the early 2000s, but it was all Ultimates books.
Oh yeah, I hated the Ultimates.
Well, and like I mean, the Ultimate Universe. I mean, there was the Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men and Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Oh no, I hate that entire, what is it, like 1016 or whatever?
Yeah,
that
the
universe can
Edgelord
go fall
universe,
off a
yeah.
cliff.
I actually have a soft spot for Ultimates. It's some of the earliest stuff I read. I'm not going to defend and say, there's definitely parts of it that are crap. Like, I'm definitely going to admit that and concede that. But some of it was interesting, and some of it was fun.
I will say
it was
concepts, but
I mean, it is so much. The Ultimates just boils down to Marvel Comics, but with more rape and gore. And that's
cannibalism.
all it came down to.
Don't forget the cannibalism.
So when it got to Ultimatum, I completely agree with you. But at that point, they were phoning it in to the point where they didn't even pay attention to their own Ultimate lore, because they were just portraying Magneto as his 616, self, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like to say is the Ultimates #1, that version of Captain America, not the version in the subsequent issues, but just in that first issue, I really liked. I thought the costume was cool. I like that, and people make fun of me for this, but I like the tactical look where it's like it's a superhero costume, but it also looks like like you as a human being with a sewing machine could make something similar.
But it also looks like they could wear this in a movie and it not look stupid. Wouldn't it be great if this was a movie, everybody?
Yeah.
There's certain characters that works with.
Yes.
And somebody who is a soldier like Captain America, I'm fine with having a suit like that. There's some characters that just shouldn't even come close to approaching it.
I would agree.
I liked Ultimate Thor, actually. I liked the fact his powers came from his belt. That was kind of neat. So he had a distinct weakness. He had to take the belt away. He lost a lot of his power. That was cool. I liked Ultimate Galactus. So there's and I liked some Ultimate Spider-Man. It was hit or miss. I did like the fact that everything was interconnected from the get-go.
The one thing about Ultimate Spider-Man that I could not... Well, there's two things. One was Bendis was clearly just aping the storylines. And there was all of this talk about how we're doing something new and different. Everything is going to be different. And the only thing that was different was like in terms of the actual arc, was that Uncle Ben had a ponytail.
Okay, well, I don't know if you remember his Kingpin storyline was pretty interesting.
I had no doubt by then.
And pretty different. Although it came at the cost of, at the time, making Doctor Strange look like an idiot, which I didn't like. So yeah, it really was hit or miss. It'd be a cool thing, and then there'd be a thing that was just like.
So, Dominic has a great question, and we should end with this because we're over.
Yeah,
I don't have to rush away today, but I did tell Mark I'd only keep him for an hour, and I apparently have lied. So
you in trouble.
But so Dominic says, why do you think DC and Marvel are burying established characters who happen to be bisexual, asexual, gay, etc., instead of using them for new stories? They've been around for years and treated as people. Mark,
I think it's a vanity thing because someone wants to get the press, the headlines for creating a gay character. They want it to be their signature character. So, why use North Star when you can just create your original gay character, and then Bleeding Cool and CBR and Vox and Vice will all write glowing articles about what a genius you are for introducing a new gay character? Or it's just being subversive for the sake of being subversive and taking a character who was historically heterosexual for, 50, 60 years and suddenly making them gay. And then you get all this praise anyway because you had the guts to take this character and alter them and make them into a minority like Iceman or the Golden Age Green Lantern, even though that their entire histories of being heterosexual are actually important parts of their characters and their ongoing narratives and their relationships. To act like that's not important and that could be changed, just out on a whim, shows that, a very poor understanding of that character. But I think that's why. I think it all just comes down to ego and vanity and trying to get those low-hanging headlines on crappy websites.
The Metal.
I don't think I have anything to add to this. I think Mark's just right. Like, I have the same opinion on that.
Mark's right. I love that. My two favorite words.
I would just say the same thing in different words. I think he's just right.
Yeah. Twitless.
Okay, so let me say some things in different words. Let me say what Mark said in different words. So I think it's an intersection of a couple factors. I think that some of it is agenda driven. I think some of it is courting controversy. Because like it's clickbait is where we live. I actually worked for a clickbait site, and it's part of the marketing, and these companies definitely know how marketing, at least they know, they think they know some theories about how marketing works, and they know how courting controversy helps things. Again, I think some of it is in fact agenda driven. There's the people who are courting the controversy for marketing's sake, and then you have the people who genuinely believe the Kool-Aid that they're selling you. So I think when you mix that together, you end up kind of with the situation we have.
So I would agree that there's a marketing aspect, courting controversy aspect. And I would agree that there is the agenda of wanting to undermine things that have gone before. I think there's the subcultural idea that if we wreck what happened before, then we can rebuild the world to be more perfect. But we have to destroy what comes first. That Marxist concept, right? Of creating the antithesis to create the new synthesis, right? I think that's a factor, but I think the bigger factor is, and the idea of a person creating, but it's not even the one thing, Mark, that I think you might be a little off on looking at the trends, is it's not even that they're creating new characters. They're just taking the predominant theme whenever, sexual variance, can we call it that without being offensive? That comes up in those categories is that they're taking pre-established characters who were definitely not variant, and they become variant because it fits, they have it. I think it has to do with the fact that they want the kudos of having, these minority population characters without actually without going through and creating the trouble of creating a character, right?
Well, they know that their new characters have no staying power. Like, who are those new X-Men that everyone's already forgotten about? Like
it also
Snowflake and something else, or
right? Well, I don't know that the new Warriors. I don't think those ever even got published.
Internet Gas Man.
Yeah. I think that was actually designed as a marketing scheme, because I don't think that book ever actually came out.
But they know that if they take Iceman, who's already been around for 60 years, or Alan Scott, who's been around for like almost 90 years, and just make them gay, then those characters aren't going anywhere because they've always been here. And now you have a perennial gay character, even if that's not what the character was.
Well, I think we're also losing one key factor. These guys are really lazy and don't want to do the work.
Right. That's what I'm getting at. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Because like I was going to go back to Tim Drake, right? Not Tim Drake as a bisexual, but Tim Drake as being Tim Drake. What did it take for him to be the second most popular, potentially the most popular Robin of history? Because Nightwing's so popular as being so beloved by fandom for being Nightwing, him being Robin is nearly secondary to him being Nightwing, right? But for Tim, right? What did it take for that? Well, Marv Wolfman had to create the character and put him into Batman Year 3, right? Then they had to go back through Batman Lonely Place of Dying, and he had to save the day while he's being saved. And then they had to spend the next 2 years training him on the page, right? They had to, so they could show him being capable and having the capacity and being likable enough. Then they had to give him a miniseries, and they had to give him another miniseries. And all this time they're building. It was a 5-year turnaround to get to the point where people were going to pick up actually it was 7 years, I think, to the point where they're going to pick up a solo series with that guy in it, and latch on, right? And so they had to invest the time to make him amazing.
Right? And it's funny because Grant Morrison did the exact opposite with Damian, where he just shows up. I'm Damian Wayne. I'm your son. I'm Robin. And if the readers don't like me, that's okay because I'm being unlikable on purpose. And you're not meant to like me. So there.
I'm the Avatar. You got to deal with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, same attitude. Yeah. Same attitude.
And the thing about that makes Damian the people that I've read that are Damian fans. the reason that they've liked Damian is because of his interplay with Dick, and they already like Dick, right?
That's a
I
clip.
know it. Stop giggling. How old is that joke?
Oh my god. His interactions with Dick.
Oh, we gotta go back and clip that
His
out.
dick handling skills are amazing. Yes.
Right. But it was with that where they had got to see him roll out through that lens, right? Or through Jonathan Kent, right? In Super Sons. And so because Jonathan Kent was written as so sincere and so genuine and such a great kid, right? Suddenly you can kind of see that interplay working out that way.
Well, even then, also Damian was written better in general as a character in Super Sons. It's almost like, even though it's supposed to kind of exist in the same world, like its own little pocket world away from everything else.
Well, I mean, and that's one of the things that so bothers me about what Bendis did with John, right? And aging him up and all that kind of stuff. It's sort of like he kind of misses what the whole point of John Kent was, right? And the point of John Kent was to build up and elevate the character of Superman, right? As if, Superman doesn't need elevated. No, he really does, because he's taking on a different role, and he goes from being, everybody's friend to being, everybody's friend who's also an awesome dad. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing in stories. It's a good thing in fiction. But no, you can't have that. And it's really weird to me too, because going back to the Silencer, right? If you, I don't know if you guys, Dan Abnett, right? He's on Twitter, and he used to be on more a few years back ago. And the interactions with his wife, because they share an account and they tweet stuff about what they're going on, and you could tell through the way he wrote Aquaman and the way he wrote in Silencer, how much, and the things he wrote on Twitter, how much his positive relationship with his wife affected his portrayals of the complementary relationship between the characters that were involved. And it was awesome to see. From what I've seen, Bendis seems like he's probably a good dad, but he only writes bad fathers. And I don't understand what's going on with that. I don't get it.
Maybe he's tearing down other fathers to make him feel better.
That would be.
He's
not
not
surprised.
himself through it.
Maybe
I think
he's a bad dad.
Eastern character.
Well, maybe honestly, if we want to get psychological about it, does anyone know Bendis's biography? Because it could be very easily, and there's a lot of writers who have this issue, his own dad.
Yeah,
he might be a better father himself, but it's writing out his own issues of fatherhood with his own.
I mean, it's also Bendis, who is one of the worst writers on the face of the earth, and I think he just doesn't know how to write any other kind of father. He just kind of Bendis dialogue. Everyone talks the same with that. Hey, what's going on? Did you hear? Did I hear what? Oh, you haven't heard? No, I haven't heard. Well, I don't know if I'm going to tell you. Are you sure? Can't you tell me? I'm not sure. Please tell me. And it just goes on back and forth like that. And everybody has dialogue exchanges. They all talk the exact same way. I think he just doesn't know how to write other kinds of characters.
He has what I call a terminal case of Joss Whedon's disease.
Yeah.
But are you?
Yeah, no, he's a Whedonite. It's the worst.
I think there's a real argument about who inspired who. Really, Bendis has always been horrible. I've never,
How dare you impugn the honor of the Balloon Lord?
That Uncle Fester looking motherfucker.
So Dominic brings in a really good point about Alan Scott. He always represented a positive relationship between a parent and their kid who happens to be LGBT. In this case, Alan's son Obsidian, superhero member of the Infinity Squad, and I think actually I'm not necessarily a fan of coming out stories. I think they're weird. But I think that if you look at the big arc of Obsidian's story, it actually was handled pretty well. And Alan Scott deals with a lot in that, 20-year arc, because he went from not knowing he had any kids after his, wife disappeared one night. His first wife just vanished, and not knowing he had any kids. And then, finding out he's a dad, finding out they have weird feelings about him, trying to build relationships with him, and then to have his son be like, oh, so here's this thing that I never told you because, you're weird. You weren't there, Dad. But I know it's not your fault because my mom was, whatever. But
Well, I mean, yeah,
that was the whole thing, and that was after, and even in Infinity Incorporated, they dealt with, Todd's adoptive family dynamics were jacked up too, and all of those things were factors in the way it was handled, and you don't see that kind of complexity being told, and I don't, and just like I love James Robinson's stuff in Starman and the stuff he's written with in Detective Comics. But man, his handling of Alan Scott, I just don't understand if he's just doing the job and the editors are coming down on that or what. But I really feel that's a betrayal of the way the character, not just the way he's been portrayed, but of the essence of what it is.
You can't pretend like Alan Scott being heterosexual wasn't an important part of his character when all of his storylines for the past 40 years, at least since the 70s, all had to do with his relationship with his wife, his estranged wife, his relationship with his biological daughter and son, his entire family life, the fact that he got married to a woman and had children. His heterosexuality was an important part of his character and had 2 children. Yeah,
he got 2 children and got married to 2 women. Right.
And to suddenly say his heterosexuality was never an important part of him. He can be gay. It doesn't change anything vital about his character. And no, it really does. But that's the thing, is that they don't care about that sort of stuff. They just wanted those low hanging headlines on CBR and Bleeding Cool and wherever. Look, Alan Scott's gay. Woo, gay Green Lantern, big fucking deal.
No, a lot of those people, I would say they're even ignorant of it. They don't know that history. So that's why they can say things like, oh, I don't know this character and I know nothing about him. Therefore, this aspect of him had nothing to do with the core, with any core aspect of his character.
Which comes back to our original topic. Hey, internet, listen. Go buy comics from the quarter bin. Go back and read the old books.
Or Ollie's.
I had oral.
I've had this argument with a lot of people, right? Certain characters' sexuality is intrinsically tied into their character. And everybody argues there is no such thing as a character where sexuality is intrinsically tied into the character. It's well, go and actually read about the character and tell me that their sexuality has nothing to do with what makes them to be a character, right? I'm talking about a femme fatale or something like that. They are inherently a sexual character. And if you try to desexify them, you actually just wrote a different character instead of the person you're including.
Mm-hmm, right.
And here's the thing about it that I'm gonna take a little hot spice take on this one here. Sexuality is intrinsically part of everything we do. Yeah. Right? Because sexuality isn't just where you stick it. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Your gender roles are not just, the things that go into, how you get your kicks, right? It's about, everything about your life, right? The way you react at work, the way you deal with your neighbor across the street,
how you carry yourself.
What happens when a dog bites your kid? All of that is part of that your gendered sexual experience, right? And you can't say, because a big part of example, Spider-Man's life, right? As an everyman character, a big part of his life is the fact that he is a young boy who wants to be a man. And so projects his concepts of masculinity, of manhood, onto the Spider-Man persona. And then you get to watch him grow into being the man he was pretending to be when he was 15. Right? So what does he do? He struggles, he fights, he pays rent, he lands the girl, right? The next thing that needs to happen is they need to make some babies.
Yeah.
An important part of his everyman arc for Peter Parker to be a father. And that's one.
And they almost did it in the 90s. They did have a kid. May got born, and then she got kidnapped by Osborn, and then we never saw her again. Mm-hmm. It just dropped plot line. I know that M2 happened and spun off from that, but in the 616 universe, May Parker is still out there. She's still out, unless One More Day undid that, but yeah.
Well, and One More Day erased everybody's memory of the events. It wasn't supposed to really release any actual events, so they wouldn't have to go back and change history at all.
Did anyone get One More Day vibes from that new Spider-Man trailer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's 100% happening.
I've been trying to avoid anything on it because I hate the Spider-Man of the MCU and all that.
I do too. I saw the trailer on my Twitter feed, and it's like, oh, so they're taking Into the Spider-Verse and mixing it with One More Day to create the ultimate bad Spider-Man story. Oh, this is going to be wonderful.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who felt that way, because there were people who were just like, they were clapping like seals about that trailer, and I'm like, this is teaching Disney all the worst possible lessons. This is teaching Disney. This is I just got this. Let's finish. Quick thought. This, in my opinion, that trailer and the reception it got basically taught Disney, in order to make money, all we have to do is dangle nostalgia in front of your face, like dangling a keychain in front of a cat, and you will just line up. And I'm like,
they already think that.
I know.
Like the Mandalorian.
I know. This is reinforcing that lesson. So it's like, get ready, because like the next batch of content is going to be nothing but.
We'll see, and that's actually, that's a big part of why, like, I am essentially noped out of Hollywood movies entirely, right?
Yeah.
Like I might watch Ghostbusters, right? I finally a year later sat down and watched Bill and Ted's, Face the Music.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say it was good, but it was
had some
fun.
redeemable qualities to it. It was pretty fun.
And I liked how, like, the Bill and Ted characters, like, weren't played off any worse than they were in the original movie. They still had noble hearts, even if they didn't always know the right thing. And the girls saving the day, even, I thought was cool, because it was the fact that, like, Bill and Ted's masterpiece are their children. Like, as a dad, we just graduated my son. My boys are both in college right now. And I'm telling you, like I about cried when they were like, that was the grand opus of Bill and Ted were their kids. I was like, oh.
Now, you just got to ignore the fact that their kids were boys in the second movie and they turned them into girls in the third one. You just got to ignore that.
They were named, but they weren't
Bill
actually
Jr. and Ted Jr. Okay,
they're still Will.
It's passable because Bill and Ted are so stupid that they would call them Brothers Jr.
All right, I can buy that.
And their wives are just like they're an extra measure of good wife. To love and to submit to these guys
because they're from the Middle Ages, so they're very.
And that's one of the things I thought was really great about it. The thing is that they were these modern women, but they still were very not. They had this traditional aspect to it, and they were willing to be long suffering for the sake of wanting their husbands to be heroes. And I thought that was a really cool dynamic that you don't see in modern movies. But it still was only okay. But man. As far as that, people are talking about, I didn't see Into the Spider-Verse. I didn't watch that Far From Home. I couldn't give two craps about any MCU stuff. People are even I think you and Tim were both like, why aren't you watching The Mandalorian? There, Mark. And I'm like, because Disney made it.
I know, right? Well, so that's the thing is I dropped out of the MCU movies a while ago. I think I dropped out after Infinity War. And I don't watch, I think the only Hollywood movies I saw last year were Sonic the Hedgehog, which was good. And I believe that. And Godzilla vs. Kong, which was great. I love this year. That was this year. That was this year.
That was this year.
So, yeah. I mean, I've lost track. I really don't see very many anymore. The Mandalorian I watched because I did like it. I hate all the movies that it was Star Wars, and I hate all the comics they're doing. But a broken clock is right twice a day, and they managed to make a good TV series. So I'll give credit where it's due. But that's about it. I generally do not watch Hollywood films anymore unless it has Godzilla in it. I couldn't give a shit.
Yeah,
I feel the exact same way, and I'm with you on Sonic as well.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed Sonic, but I wouldn't have gone. The only reason I saw Endgame, I was actually over after about 4 weeks after Infinity War. I was pretty much over the MCU. I don't know what it was about it, but there's just something about it just stuck in my craw, and I just couldn't get over it.
I was over 30 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, well, I missed the first 10, so that was probably probably a continued question there. But man, but I only saw Endgame because my kids really wanted to see Endgame. And I said I don't want to go, but if you want to go, I'll take you. And they're like, well, Dad, we kind of want to see, it's okay. But
we
I
kind of
thought
want you
that
to
was-
sit through this 3.5 hour movie with us. You know, it's not a big deal. It's just 3.5 hours of your time plus the trailer, so it's more like 4.5 hours.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Yeah.
when you're a dad, part of what you
Yeah.
do is you're there to lay down your life for your kids. That's
Good God! When my dad had to take me to something awful like the Chipmunk Adventure, at least it had the benefit of only being 75 minutes. You know.
No, see, my dad got revenge on me, right? Because he used to have to take me to that stuff, and then he's like, "Hey, I like Star Wars. You're coming with me." And I'm like, "Okay, the Last Jedi can't be that bad." After that, I refuse to ever see a movie my dad wants to take me to again. I wouldn't even go and see the next Star Wars with him.
Did he know it was going to be terrible? Was he just?
Well, neither of us did. We went and saw like opening weekend or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, it was before the reviews and shit really came in, outside of like from critics, but who listens to like newspaper critics and stuff anyway?
Yeah, not.
We didn't get
anymore.
like the consumer reviews yet.
They've completely
Yeah.
completely shown their ass as far as that stuff goes. But okay, so guys, thanks.
Yeah, I gotta go to bed.
Yeah, it's late, and it's almost an old show. So Twitless had to step away for a second. So I guess normally he always bugs me about shilling stuff. So Mark, you've got stuff coming up. I'll try to hang on for a little bit. Right?
Yeah, let me put the reason why I'm here to shill my my garbage. Let me send the link to you in the private chat because I probably can't post it myself in the public chat. But that's the link to the Indiegogo for Black Ops X Common America. It's the limited last call for that book. There's only 7 days left on it, so if you wanted to pick up,
hey, I have read, and I really because I got the digital when the Kickstarter wrapped
cool.
up. Yeah. So I've read it, and it is quite good.
Oh, we got an endorsement. We got an endorsement up in here. You can't afford not to buy our book.
So no, it's. I mean, first of all, it's solid, and it's $10. So how could you not? How could you afford to not buy it? For one. So, but beyond that, I mean, it's a solid, fun story. Absolutely. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, dips and all that kind of stuff. I tell you, I'm a little more. It's weird, but it's true. I'm a little more excited to see Common America 4 right now. I mean,
yeah,
the crossover was great. It was a good intersection of the two storylines that were going on there. I dig it, but some of those dangling threads from 3, I'm really excited to pull on.
No, I don't blame you because Black Ops X Common America is actually the 4th volume of Black Ops. So Black Ops, we collect the omnibus every 3 volumes. Common America we collect every 4. So Black Ops X Common America is actually the start of a new arc for Black Ops. But Common America 4 will conclude the first saga in Common America, where everything kind of comes together. So yeah, I understand like people are being more anxious for that one.
Yeah. So, but it's fun. It's fun stuff for sure.
Okay.
So, and it's well, there's a little plot point in it that I had picked up from the end of 3, but so that's fun. Anyhow, so and you're starting and what is it? End of September for Common America 4.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you called me Andy for a second. I was like, wait, who's Andy? No, oh yeah. So, Common America 4 is going to launch on Kickstarter in late September. Once the Indiegogo last call for Black Ops X Common America fulfills. Second half of September. We're also going to launch the Common America Webtoons weekly webcomic. It'll be over on the Webtoons.com platform.
Nice.
Yep. So this will be a big month for Common America.
I tell you, man. I gotta say I'm a little jealous. Because I know you guys are gonna do great, but like that's the inverse of what we have been trying to do since 2006. Was have a free webcomic, get everybody interested in that, and then sell stuff. And it's not working. But
we're doing it kind of backwards. We sold our comics first, and then we're doing the web comic. So maybe we'll see if that works.
You've got a built-in fan base that I think is going to transfer over really well because it's all built on the internet anyway. And I think you're gonna create yourself an amazing feedback loop. But I will just sit here in my basement and think, man, I had that idea. Drat. So I'm kidding, just a little bit.
I know.
So also Metal. You also do the webcomic game.
Yeah, see, I just sell my webcomic out of like my site is almost kind of a little bothersome to navigate. So out of convenience, people would just rather buy the full comic than read it on my website. So that kind of works for me. I'm like, I should upgrade my site, but this is working out. Maybe I'll just leave it the way it is.
And your stuff's available. You've got a shop link off of your site, which I posted.
Yeah, and it all links to Indie Planet, where I do the print-on-demand stuff for anybody who wants physical versions of the comics. I have another book that's supposed to be on there soon. I've just been really busy, and I have to make 2 bonus pages for the print version that kind of ties the story together that I just haven't bothered to make. I'm behind on things, but I'm still rolling things out, and there's like merch and stuff for people who are interested in the story if they want to wear like a t-shirt or something. I got all the links and stuff there. You can find it on the website.
So there you have it. There you have it, folks. Now, Twitless also has written speaking of the classic comic, the classic hero stuff, Tales of Omega, The Adventures of Omega Girl. I read the first issue, and it is good stuff, man. It's there now. There's 4 stories in it. I've asked you this before. I got to keep remembering, but they're like little mini episodes. Great stuff. It's got if you dig Silver Age comics at all, especially like Supergirl's Bronze Age stuff or the Silver Age Superman stuff, you would just love Adventures of Omega Girl.
I've got a screen share if you don't mind.
Ooh. Oh yeah, that's right. Look at that.
So this is my superhero comic book. You can get it for $3.99 for a print on demand, or I think it's $1.99 if you want a digital download. Classic superhero action. Come join the adventure as Omega Girl defends Angel City from the forces of Jackal.
And we're gonna have sometime. Probably October when I get it scheduled, but we're gonna have a conversation about your amazing names for things.
Oh,
so yeah, he's got the best names for characters, both in Omega Girl and in his webcomic, superschool.com. But you can check it out right there.
Yep. Thank you very much.
So now I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about my stuff, just really briefly, because you can check out. I was talking about our webcomic earlier, Forces of Good and Evil, which I have been working at with an assortment of people since 2006. We've got almost 700 pages up there, 24 chapters that are available for free in mostly in black and white and drawn. It's a comic predominantly drawn by writers. So, that's always fun. We are on Webtoons we are coloring the archives and those are moving along there. So you can check that out on Webtoons as well. Or you can also check out, we've got blogs and history bits and character character profiles and all sorts of stuff on idealcomics.net as well. And if you check out, if you want to see us, the background stuff, as we're making stuff, you can support us on Patreon. We are working on a few projects that we'll be releasing information on as it goes on. And I'm not going to go on about that tonight, but there you have it. So with everything else. So yeah, anyway, that's the show, guys. Next week, we are going to be having the folks from Dragon Multimedia to come on to talk about the comic they have called Shift, SHYFT. So that's next week's show. And stay tuned for announcements on when we're having our Stan Lee talk, because that is going to happen.
Next year.
Maybe. It might be next year. I think it's the week after next that we're having when we talk about American-born Chinese.
At this point, the Kingdom Come debate will happen first.
Before Stan Lee's?
Yeah.
Well,
Or maybe you'll just work them into one show, like the first half of the hour or whatever.
Well, you can't discuss Kingdom Come in a half an hour, and I wouldn't want to discuss Stan Lee for just a half an hour. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this, Metal, but Captain Cummings, who began his internet fame as a reviewer, is a comic scholar now. Like,
yeah.
he digs deep in stuff, man. Yeah. So
You'll just have to talk really, really fast.
no.
Yeah.
I already do, but that's a different story. Okay, we're gonna call it. We're gonna wrap it. Thank you guys for chat for coming in. It was a bubbling conversation in there. I appreciated it. I didn't get a chance to highlight everyone, but it was a lot of fun. And Mark, sorry to keep you longer than I said, but man, we just kept talking. So
That's all right, man. Have a good night, everybody.
yeah, everybody, we will
Thank you.
catch you all around. Until then, keep reading comics.